There are some big questions at stake here, but most importantly, can the president federalize and deploy the National Guard into states without the consent of those states' governors? So really at play here is the balance of power between states and the federal government. There's also questions about what the check of the court will be on this power. Historically, courts have been very deferential to presidential authority when it comes to matters of public safety, but where will they put limitations on this? And what will the role be of federal troops, of the National Guard, on our city's streets? There was a hearing over the weekend in Oregon, and the judge, Immergut, said that the arguments she was hearing from the Trump administration risked blurring the line between civil and military power. She said with those arguments, the president could send military troops virtually anywhere at any time. So she expressed deep concern here. And she also said that she hadn't really seen any evidence of unmanageable assault on federal property or on personnel, which is the federal government's justification for bringing the National Guard in and for federalizing them.
All right, so let me get this straight. The president of the United States just went to federal court and literally begged, like actually pleaded, for judges to save him from his own mess. And here's the kicker. 2 of the 3 judges listening to this desperate plea, yeah, Trump appointed them himself. Can you believe this? This isn't some random lawsuit about parking tickets or whatever. We're talking about Trump asking appeals court judges to let him deploy National Guard troops into American cities and hold back $4 billion in foreign aid that Congress already approved. $4 billion. And the judges, even his own judges, are sitting there going, wait, hold on. Do you actually have the legal authority to do any of this? Like, this is wild. The hearings happened October 8th through the 10th, and Trump's legal team stood in front of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, basically saying if you don't give the president his power back right now, the entire country is going to fall apart. Those were their words: devastating losses, national disaster. All because judges put temporary brakes on Trump's moves. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. And here's what makes this so absolutely insane. The administration is out here acting like the sky is falling because a court said, hey, maybe you can't just do whatever you want without any checks or balances. Come on. This is the same guy who spent his entire political career talking about executive power and how the president should be able to act fast and cut through bureaucracy. And now when courts actually review whether he's going too far, suddenly it's an emergency. Let's talk about what actually happened here. Trump wanted to send National Guard troops to Portland, not because the governor asked for help, not because there was some massive crisis that local authorities couldn't handle. He just decided he wanted federal troops in an American city. And when a judge said that's probably not legal, the White House freaked out and ran to the appeals court saying we need this power back immediately or else everything's going to collapse. Then there's the $4 billion in foreign aid. Congress, the legislative branch that's supposed to control spending, already approved this money. It's done. It's law. But Trump decided, nah, I'm going to hold on to this. I'm just not going to release it. And his lawyers are in court trying to argue that's totally fine. The president can just ignore what Congress says about money. Are you kidding me? This is the exact same playbook that got him impeached the first time. Remember Ukraine? Remember withholding aid to pressure another country? And now we're doing this again. But this time his own argument is that he should be allowed to do it whenever he wants. So the judges, and again, 2 of them are Trump appointees, they're asking the most basic questions. Where does this authority come from? What law gives you this power? Show us the legal basis. And apparently Trump's team couldn't give them good answers because the judges came back and said, yeah, we're going to keep these restrictions in place while we figure this out. The National Guard can stay federalized, meaning under federal control, but they can't be deployed locally into cities. And the foreign aid, still blocked. Trump can't touch it until this gets fully reviewed. That's not even a final decision. That's just the appeals court saying pump the brakes until we actually look at this properly. And Trump's response, absolute meltdown mode. He's on true social warning about disasters. His lawyers are telling the court that stripping his powers will devastate the United States. Like, really? Following the law and having courts review your actions is devastating? Here's what nobody's talking about, though. The Washington Post ran an analysis on October 10th saying that Trump's credibility in court has sunk to unseen levels. Judges are getting fed up. They're tired of the hyperbole, tired of the emergency claims, tired of being told that every single legal check is somehow going to destroy America. And this matters. Really matters, because we're watching in real time as the courts push back against presidential overreach. This isn't about whether you like Trump or hate Trump. This is about whether any president can just bypass Congress, deploy military forces domestically whenever they feel like it, and claim emergency powers without actual emergencies. The hearings this week were basically a stress test of executive power. And what we're seeing is that even Trump-appointed judges aren't willing to just rubber stamp everything. They're asking hard questions. They're demanding legal justification. They're saying no when the answers don't add up. So buckle up, because this isn't over, not even close. This case is going to define how much power Trump actually has for the rest of his term. It's going to set precedents that affect every future president. And it's all happening right now, while most people are completely missing how huge this actually is. Let's dive into what's really going on here. Okay, so here's where this gets really interesting, and honestly kind of terrifying when you think about it. What we're watching isn't just Trump versus some judges. This is a full-blown constitutional crisis brewing over separation of powers, and most people have no idea how serious this actually is. Let me break down what happened in those hearings, because the details matter. Trump's lawyers walk into the Ninth Circuit, one of the most liberal circuits in the country, by the way, and they're facing a 3-judge panel, 2 Trump appointees and 1 other judge. And you think Trump's team would be confident, right? Like they've got the home court advantage with their own judges. But that's not what happened. Not even close. These judges came prepared, and they were not messing around. They hit Trump's lawyers with question after question about legal authority. Where's your statutory basis? What emergency justifies this? How is this different from previous cases where courts said presidents can't do this? And the administration's answers? Basically just, trust us. We need this power. It's an emergency. If you don't let us do this, bad things will happen. Yeah, that's not how constitutional law works. You can't just claim emergency powers and expect courts to shrug and say, okay, cool, do whatever. Here's the thing most people misunderstand about this case. This isn't really about Portland or foreign aid specifically. Those are just the examples, the test cases. What this is really about is whether Trump can declare something an emergency and then use that declaration to override Congress, override governors, override normal legal processes. Think about what he's claiming. He's saying the president can federalize National Guard troops, which takes them away from state control, and then deploy them into American cities over the objection of local officials. Not during an invasion, not during a rebellion, just because the president decides there's a problem that needs federal troops. Like, do you understand how dangerous that precedent is? If Trump can do that, then every future president can do that. Any president could just say, I don't like what's happening in this city. I'm sending in federal troops. That's not how America is supposed to work. That's not federalism. That's not states' rights. That's just executive power run wild. And then there's the money issue. Congress has one main power, the power of the purse. The Constitution is super clear about this. Congress decides how money gets spent. The president can request money, can suggest budgets, can veto spending bills. But once Congress appropriates funds, that money is supposed to be spent the way Congress directed. But Trump's argument is that he can just not do that. He can hold money that Congress approved. He can decide which programs get funded and which don't, regardless of what the law says. In his legal justification, executive discretion, national security, emergency powers, all these vague terms that basically mean because I said so. The judges weren't buying it, and you could tell from the way the hearings went. When judges start asking really specific questions about statutory authority, and you hear lawyers giving broad general answers about presidential power, that's a bad sign for the lawyers. That means they don't have good legal arguments. One judge apparently asked Trump's team to point to the specific law that allows the president to withhold congressionally approved foreign aid, and the response was basically a word salad about executive branch flexibility and foreign policy discretion. Come on, that's not a legal argument. That's just hoping the judges won't push back. But here's what makes this even more complicated. Trump has actually won a lot of these executive power fights before. Remember the travel ban? Courts eventually let him do that. The border wall emergency? He got away with redirecting military construction funds. So his team probably walked into these hearings thinking they could pull the same playbook, except something's changed. Judges are getting skeptical, not just liberal judges. Trump's own appointees are pushing back. And that Washington Post analysis really nailed why. The administration has cried wolf too many times. Everything's an emergency. Everything's critical. Everything requires immediate action with no oversight. After a while, even friendly judges start asking, okay, but is this really an emergency? Or are you just trying to avoid normal legal processes? And when you can't give a good answer to that question, you lose. Even if the judges want to rule in your favor, they need some kind of legal hook to hang their decision on. So the Ninth Circuit came back with this split the baby ruling. They said, okay, the National Guard can stay federalized, meaning Trump keeps some control, but they can't be deployed into Portland or other cities while this case continues. And the foreign aid stays frozen. Trump can't release it or withhold it until the legal issues get resolved. That's actually a pretty clever compromise from the judge's perspective. They're not completely shutting Trump down, which would look political and might not survive Supreme Court review, but they're also not giving him everything he wants because the legal questions are too serious to just ignore. Trump's team hated this ruling. They wanted full authority restored immediately, and they made it very clear in court, this isn't good enough. We need the power back now. Every day without this authority causes devastating harm. But the judges basically said, okay, then show us the harm. Give us specific examples of what's being devastated. Explain exactly why waiting a few more weeks for full legal review is so catastrophic. And apparently Trump's team couldn't do that either. They just kept making broad claims about national security and presidential authority. Here's the deeper issue though. This case is happening in a much bigger context. Trump's been fighting courts since day one of his second term. Fights over immigration policy, fights over regulatory rollbacks, fights over executive orders, and he's losing more than he's winning. Why? Because courts learned from the first Trump term. They know the playbook now. They know to ask for specific statutory authority. They know to demand actual evidence of emergencies rather than just accepting claims. They know to look at whether actions are about policy disagreements or genuine legal authority. And judges are also paying attention to the broader pattern. When you see the same administration coming to court over and over, claiming emergency powers for things that don't look like emergencies, you start to wonder if this is really about legal authority or just about avoiding congressional oversight. That's what's happening here. The Ninth Circuit looked at Trump's claims and thought, this feels less like a genuine emergency and more like the president trying to do things Congress won't approve. Deploying troops into cities when governors don't want them there, that's not an emergency response, that's a policy choice. Withholding foreign aid that Congress approved, that's not executive discretion, that's defying legislative authority. So now we're stuck in this weird limbo. Trump can't do what he wants. The courts haven't said he definitely can't ever do it, just that he needs to prove his legal authority first, and everyone's waiting to see what happens next. Which brings us to the Supreme Court, because you know that's where this is headed. Trump's going to appeal. He's going to ask the Supreme Court to step in and restore his authority while the case continues. And that's when things get really interesting because the Supreme Court has been pretty friendly to executive power claims, but even they have limits. Let's get into what this all actually means. All right, so let's break this down into what actually matters because there's a lot of legal jargon and courtroom drama. But at the end of the day, this comes down to three big questions. Question one, can any president just deploy federal troops into American cities whenever they want? Right now, the answer is no, at least according to the Ninth Circuit. And honestly, that should be the answer. We have laws about this. The Insurrection Act lets presidents deploy troops domestically, but only in specific situations, actual insurrections, rebellions, cases where local authorities can't maintain order and formally request help. Trump's trying to expand that. He's arguing the president has inherent authority to deploy troops to protect federal interests or maintain public safety, which sounds reasonable until you realize what that actually means. It means any president could decide they don't like protests in the city and send in troops. Any president could override governors and take control of state National Guard units. That's not a conservative or liberal issue. That's an authoritarian issue. And the courts are rightfully saying, yeah, we need to be really careful about letting presidents have that kind of power without clear legal authority and serious justification. The temporary ruling keeps troops federalized but blocks local deployment. That's the court saying we're not going to let you use these troops as your personal police force while we figure out if you even have the legal right to try. Question 2. Can presidents just ignore Congress when it comes to spending money? This one's even more clear-cut. The Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse, not the president, Congress. Article 1. It's literally one of the first powers listed. The president executes the laws Congress passes, including spending laws. But Trump's arguing he has discretion to withhold funds based on foreign policy concerns or national security. And look, presidents do have some flexibility in how they spend money. The executive branch has to implement programs, and that requires judgment calls. Nobody's denying that. What you can't do is just refuse to spend money Congress appropriated because you disagree with the policy. That's not discretion. That's defying Congress. That's substituting your judgment for the legislative branch's judgment on what should be funded. This exact issue came up during Trump's first term with Ukraine aid. Congress approved the money. Trump held it back to pressure Ukraine. He got impeached for it. And now we're doing the same thing again, just with different countries and different aid packages. The appeals court blocked Trump from withholding the $4 billion because they looked at the situation and said, this looks less like legitimate executive discretion and more like the president trying to run foreign policy against Congress's wishes. And you can't do that. Congress makes the laws. Presidents execute them. Question 3. What happens when courts don't trust the president anymore? This is the big one. This is what that Washington Post analysis was really about. Trump's credibility in court has collapsed. Judges don't believe the administration's emergency claims anymore. They don't trust the legal arguments. They're skeptical of everything. And that matters because courts usually give presidents the benefit of the doubt. especially on national security and foreign policy stuff. Courts traditionally say, okay, the president has information we don't have. The president has responsibilities we don't have. We should defer to executive judgment. But that deference breaks down when presidents abuse it, when everything's an emergency, when every action is critical and urgent, when legal arguments keep contradicting established law. Eventually, judges stop deferring and start demanding proof. That's where we are now. Trump's team walks into court claiming the sky is falling, and judges are responding with, okay, show us, prove it, give us evidence. Stop making broad claims and start providing specific facts and legal authority. And when the administration can't do that, when they just keep insisting, trust us, we need this power, it's an emergency, judges rule against them, even Trump-appointed judges. Because at the end of the day, judges care about the law and their own credibility more than they care about making any president happy. So where does this go from here? 3 scenarios. Scenario 1, the full Ninth Circuit or the Supreme Court sides with Trump and restores his authority. This would be a massive expansion of presidential power. It would essentially say presidents can deploy troops domestically and control spending in ways that override Congress. Possible, but based on these hearings, unlikely. Scenario 2, the courts rule against Trump and set firm limits on executive power. This would be a big loss for Trump, but a win for separation of powers. It would clarify that presidents can't just claim emergencies to bypass normal constitutional processes. More likely, and honestly, the outcome these judges seem to be leaning toward, Scenario 3, some kind of compromise where courts say Trump has some authority, but with significant limits and oversight requirements. This is probably the most realistic. Courts don't like completely shutting down executive power, but they also don't want to give presidents unlimited authority. What makes this scary is that we're having this fight during Trump's second term, when theoretically he should be more experienced and his team should understand legal boundaries better. Instead, we're seeing more aggressive assertions of power and less concern about legal constraints. And that sets up real problems for the future. If Trump's pushing this hard on executive authority now, what happens in an actual crisis? What happens if there's a real emergency and courts have already lost trust in the administration's claims? You end up in a situation where the president might actually need emergency powers for legitimate reasons, but courts won't grant them because the administration has cried wolf too many times. That's dangerous for everybody. The hearings this week were basically a warning shot. The courts are saying, we're watching you, we're not going to rubber stamp everything you do, and you need to start following the law instead of trying to work around it. Whether Trump listens to that warning, yeah, we'll see. Bottom line, this isn't just some technical legal dispute. This is about fundamental questions of how American government works. Can presidents act like kings, or do they have to follow the same rules as everyone else? Can executive power expand infinitely during claimed emergencies, or are there real limits? The appeals court just said there are limits. Trump's pleading for them to change their minds. And how this plays out over the next few months could reshape presidential power for generations. And that's exactly why you need to be paying attention to this case, because whatever happens here affects every future president and every future crisis. This is the stuff that actually matters, way more than whatever daily drama is trending on social media. More on this as it develops. This fight's just getting started.